On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
The time difference between the eastern United States time zone and Afghanistan is 8.5 hours. They are 8.5 hours ahead there, which means tonight it is already tomorrow in Afghanistan, which means it is 9 years ago that we invaded Afghanistan. If the war were over, we would call that an anniversary. Because the war is not over, instead, what we have to say is that tomorrow is day 1 of year 10 of America's war in Afghanistan. Joining us tonight for the interview is NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel. Richard, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming in.
It's great to see you. How are you?
I'm good, but weirded out by 10 years starting in Afghanistan.
Well, you want to hear something even stranger?
Yeah.
I speak with military commanders, as you know, a lot, and I ask them, well, how things are going in Afghanistan, and some recently say, well, you know, we're still trying to get our handle around the cultural significance and the cultural ramifications of Afghanistan. Now, recently, this is 9 years in, and they are still trying to figure out the cultural nuances and how the different tribal politics work in the start of year 10.
While our military strategy hinges on this incredibly culturally sensitive counterinsurgency idea that we're essentially going through military force to create the space for them to build a government.
Well, first it was counterterrorism, and then it was we're going to make hearts and minds and make friends, and now the idea is, well, we'll come up with some sort of peace deal with the insurgents. So there's been a lot of strategies, and I think the U.S. is still searching for what to do in Afghanistan. What is it trying to accomplish there?
Well, General Petraeus told the New York Times last week, quote, "This is how you end these kinds of insurgencies," essentially saying this is how the war ends, talking about the fact that the Karzai government is negotiating with the Taliban. I think sort of trying to prep the American media for the idea that the Afghanistan war will end, and it will end by talking.
That's the end game, and that is what he wants to do. Remember, General Petraeus didn't want to be there. He didn't even want this job. He had a better job, if you will, at CENTCOM, and when the previous general pretty much imploded, he was drafted in. And by all accounts, he wants to be there for a year and wants to wrap this conflict up. The only way you're going to do that is to come up with a negotiated settlement and to come up with a smaller objective. What was the objective? Was it to get rid of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan? You can do that if you make a deal with the militants and say, okay, we will give you some sort of arrangement, but get rid of al-Qaeda. And I've spoken with Taliban leaders, and they say they're willing to do that. You just have to find a consensus and find a way that gets everyone on board.
So how far along are these talks, and how involved is the United States?
The talks are probably not as far along as the Washington Post implied today, but they are pretty far along. The Taliban is a divided organization, and I've spoken with senior U.S. military intelligence officials, and they say that the top leadership of the Taliban living in Pakistan want a deal. They want to go home. They've had enough of this. They're losing control of their own organization. That some of the more radical leaders on the ground who are fighting in eastern Afghanistan or southern Afghanistan no longer listen to them. And that this older generation of the Taliban may have learned something from its experience, deeply regrets defending Osama bin Laden, and would like to come back to the party. The question is, can you trust them? Can you make a deal? And are they still relevant when the people who are on the ground fighting, carrying the AK-47s, don't necessarily listen to their older leadership? But that's what Petraeus wants to do. Classic divide and conquer. Make a deal with the people who are willing to make a deal. Eliminate and ostracize those who won't. It's what he did in Iraq, and that is the way you end this conflict.
Well, isn't Pakistan then the most important wild card? I mean, Pakistan right now, the government blocking those crossing points in anger of NATO helicopters shooting people in Pakistani territory. Logistically, how important that is? Politically, how important is that?
Look back at exactly what happened in Pakistan. And there have been drone attacks. There's been this shadow war going on in Pakistan for some time now. And everyone in Pakistan knows that it happens. But the Pakistani government doesn't talk about it very much. And it's been drone attacks in remote areas. What happened over the last 2 weeks has been significantly different. Last week, first, helicopters crossed in and attacked, killing about 50 people, a lot of them insurgents, according to the U.S. military. Then, last week, helicopters again crossed over and killed 2 or 3, Pakistan says 3, of its border guards. Now, that is an act of war. When you have helicopters crossing into an allied country and attacking your friendly forces there. So Pakistan they got very upset. They were insulted. They thought their sovereignty was violated. And they responded, which in a draconian way, cutting off these supply lines. So now you have hundreds of tankers going through Pakistan that can't get into Afghanistan, that are literally stuck by the side of the roads.
Sitting ducks.
Sitting ducks, and a lot of them are getting set on fire. And that's the situation right now. Today, the U.S. ambassador in Pakistan, apologized.
Right.
That apology could unblock this crisis. But it is a real crisis. And it also shows how, to understand what's going on in Pakistan right now, you also have to understand the political situation in the country. The government has been weak, and the media in that country is very, very aggressive. So when everyone saw that helicopters were coming in, it became a media frenzy in Pakistan, and the government had to react to placate its own people.
Incredible stuff. I mean, it's America's war in Afghanistan, as declared. It's America's war in some sense in Pakistan, whether or not we talk about it as a war, but it's pretty incredible to think about year 10 in Afghanistan starting tomorrow. Richard, thanks for helping us cover it. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Great to see you, my friend.
One thing to remember, there's this, I think this sums it all up. There was an opinion poll recently, and it said that 6 in 10 Pakistanis believe that the U.S. is an enemy, and only 1 in 10 called the U.S. a partner. That's a real troubling number.
But remember, it's not a war.